Hey everybody, we are teaching Tilt Brush, and this Tilt Brush is all about landscapes, part 2, going into what really makes a landscape come alive. And really, it's all in the details. So we're going to look at this as an example. Here is a lovely forest landscape. This one would be considered an environmental piece, because as you can see, I can turn around in this thing, and everywhere we go is this wonderful deep forest atmosphere. As we pull back and move it away, you can see it's really just one section of forest, but it was made so that it's very environmental and you're inside of it. It really feels like you're inside of a forest. A more traditional landscape might be one like this ice winter world, where you can see this is much more, if I pull it back and away, it is one single small piece, but it does feel like a landscape when you load it in for the actual user. You can see it's got horizons and all the details. This has a very cold winter Iceland feeling, and the more you explore the landscape, the more it comes alive and you feel a story or a history or location happening here. So we're going to take the sketch that we started with our very simple landscape, and we're going to see what we can do with the details to really make this come alive and focus attention, so when our viewer experiences this landscape, we focus their attention with what we want them to experience. We help them, guide them to see the details we want them to see. So we've got this starter using the basics that we looked at using the other lesson. So we're now going to go in and add details to see if we can make this environment come alive. Really, we have several different regions going on here. We have the mountains in the background. So if we were going to go detail, let's get specific. Are they steep, jagged mountains like the Himalayas? Are they long, rolling mountains like the Appalachians? What sort of environment are we representing here? If we have a forest, nice little forest to start with, but now we'll get specific. Rainforest would have different details than an alpine forest, which would have different details from the green leafy forest of Robin Hood, that type of thing. So we can start with a generic forest, but the details are how we can really bring out the feelings, specific feelings that we're looking for. We've got a tiny village here. Is this a fantasy medieval village? Is this a science fiction outpost? The details give it a little more context. So we're going to look at different tools and different ways we can bring this a lot more personality. Rather than just the basic landscapes to get the settings, we're now going to give it very specific feelings. Now with a landscape, it could be very, very, very big. We could actually make a whole world here. So if we're going to think about how other people use this landscape, where do we want to focus their attention? That's where we put all the details. So I've got a very sort of general landscape right now, and our eye is naturally drawn to these places because that's where the details are. So if I wanted to bring the attention back into the mountains, then going back here and adding stuff will draw attention, will draw focus. I might even need to go in and redraw sections from earlier, because you'll notice as we get close, these are just fronts. These aren't actual mountain ranges. So maybe I'll go in and erase what's here, remove these mountains, and draw a mountain with much more detail. One mountain in this background with a lot of detail is certainly going to get attention, and people will either go over to it or bring it closer to themselves to experience what's happening in that part of your environment. So with this landscape, I've already got some details going here, so we're going to focus in on what we've got. We may bring in some more details in the background to enhance the setting, but I'm going to add more details over here to bring attention. So our setting, we're going to make it steep Himalayan mountains, but it's just a setting, so not too much detail here. But the details for a steep Himalayan mountain include things like, instead of green mountains, we're going to have gray mountains, big stone mountains in the background. And we're going to make sure the distant ones get a little bit darker, and even a little bit darker in the background there. Let's set him in the background. He in the foreground because he's a little bit paler, but not blocking all the other guys. We'll even add snowy peaks up on top. Snowy peaks on the mountainsides here. So now with even just general details, my landscape's getting a lot more personality. Now we've got a setting, now we're more in the Alps or the high Rockies rather than any old mountains. So now we're going to go in the parts we want people to experience, the town, the lake, the forest. So let's go into this town first. So we've got the general form, a town with buildings, but the details, let's zoom all the way into this town here. It's the details that help us really figure out what kind of town is this. Is this a science fiction outpost? Is this a medieval town? Is this rude hovels in the mountain? Maybe this is a castle. It's supposed to be mansions in the mountain. So instead of just these brown blobs, let's go ahead and remove some of these guys. Any other details? Let's leave that one just for reference. And now I'm going to go in thinking more about, okay, let's do this as the classic fantasy setting. So I'm going to get some beige and try to keep these fairly rectangular. Do I have a way of doing a quick block here? Easiest way would be give myself a block. And now let's see if we can get a rough little building here. There we go. Thank you. We'll get for a dark thatch roof. So a thatch roof is going to be hay. And a little smaller. Now we'll grab that whole piece, turn that into a group. So that's our little house. And now we'll get several little houses. We'll make a couple of outbuildings over here. Let's get these guys down a little bit onto the ground. There we go. And we'll grab a bigger house over here. Instead of this, we don't need him anymore. Now we'll put our big house over here. And this one, we'll actually do a big house with sort of a wing on it. House with a wing on it. A little bit of an angle. There we go. So now when we look at this, it's starting to get a little more context, a little more detail. If this was all gray domes and antennas with blinky lights, obviously science fiction. If this was our gray castle with orange turrets or something. Since I want this to be more of a village, I'm just going to go ahead and grab some more of these little houses. Get a couple of different house clusters. Again, maybe change size and scale on a couple. Let's actually grab these two and move them over here. So now we've got a little bit more of a village happening here. Really don't need the guides anymore. Is it going to let me get the guides? Oh, guides are part of the group, unfortunately. Well, that's not important. You can see what I mean as far as using the details to give those items in your landscape a lot more personality. So if this is a medieval village, if this was a modern day city, we now put in gray roads, that type of thing. What enhances the setting? So with this forest, since I'm using spikes, this gives more of an alpine pine forest. So now going in, adding ground clutter. Okay, so now we'll grab a brighter green with our brush, splatter brush, and a brighter green, but not too bright because we don't want it to overwhelm. We can now do clusters of bushes and things like that. Let's get some of these painted in here. And again, using techniques from some of our other lessons, if I wanted to apply this as a general area texture or area of effect, I can select the pieces in question and start making lots of duplicates. So now I've got a lot of bushes. And again, changing size and orientation. I could even get a whole bunch of the pieces as drawn and select that as a larger group. So instead of just the spiky pine forest, there's a lot of other stuff going on in here as well. Variations in color, variations in size, gives it, even quickly general, a lot more feeling of depth, a lot more personality. Maybe I'll go in and I'll start adding, there's a certain point where we want the viewers to have more attention. So let me make an interesting tree. And we'll get some brown for the trunk. Tree. So I'm going to grab that tree, place it in the forest, say over here. So those types of details, now when I look at the forest from a distance, it stands out as something different in that forest, which attracts attention, which now we move in closer to see what's happening. As a pine forest, maybe I'll start adding dead trees in or clusters of hills. If there's supposed to be landmarks or points of interest, those are the things that get the most attention to help stand out in this landscape and environment. So now you can see that there's a part of the forest that's got something the other part of the forest doesn't have. Or maybe I'll go back into the hills over here since I'm supposed to be in the Alps. We'll grab some more of that gray, dark gray. And start bringing in chunks and rocks within our mountaintop here. So when I have a castle or something in the forest, we can see these things where there's a lot more attention to detail. Now, as somebody's casually looking at the map, the tree as the green and the gray of the castle start to attract attention. So as people are looking at the landscape, those are the details that they start to home in on. I can now go back here. Okay, we have a lake, so let's introduce a little bit of a stream. We're going to need to keep it pale so it doesn't overwhelm things. Let's see if I can just, for starters, get a suggestion of the stream over here, and we'll get a little bit of motion into it. A little more blue. Now we get a little bit more of the blue translucence. That's a little too bright. Maybe it's not too bad for what I'm trying to do here. Since it is translucent, we can sort of draw over it in multiple strokes, which gives it changes in tone and texture. along with our blinkety lights. Kind of hard to see at that range. But as we move in and look at details, more of these details start to come to life. Looks like we're too far away to see some of those details. There we go. It isn't until you get in close until some of those tiny details. And it's just a little too close. But again, it depends how much you want your viewers to interact with your environment. Do you want them to get up close and look at things? Do you want them to grab the environment and zoom in closer? Since we're in a virtual reality environment, you have a lot more ways for people to interact with what you're creating. So if people weren't paying attention, they might not notice that over here we've got this little castle, this little fortress peeking in the forest. But anybody who actually explores the landscape, it's these little details that make things pop, that make things stand out. Here in this case, we have our main label over here. Well, maybe when we get down to this scale, let's grab this little banner here. And when we get down to this scale, now we'll give it the message. Now we'll go over to this house and we'll grab another of these labels. Put this one over this house. Give it the label. And so on and so forth. So we've got things on the scale that we want people to interact. When we're all the way back in the starting environment, we see the overall pieces. And then when we move in to interact, these other pieces start to pop out and become useful. So now that I'm at this scale, what are the details? Okay, so now we'll grab a cobblestone path. Grab our quick cobblestones here. So when we pull out, okay, now we'll go in and we'll add some bushes and flowers. Bushes, get a little bit of brighter green for some highlights. Now I'll add some flowers, some very bright colors, but just little spots. So at normal size, they're barely even noticeable. In fact, my guides are really starting to irritate me here. So you are no longer a group. And I don't want any of you. Go away, you're annoying me. See, unfortunately, right now they're part of the group, so I'd have to go through and ungroup each darn piece to get rid of that part. But rather than doing so, you can see how on our normal view, it's the details that draw attention. And as we move in, the details on this level are what make it feel natural and what, again, will guide people to where they're supposed to go next. Now that we see labels here, we know the places we can go in those locations. With our VR, we can change scale like this. So I can now zoom all the way out and now add more countryside and more mountains to give it more context, maybe expand the forest, put more details in, or expand to a more larger village down here. Whatever you need to do, VR and Tilt Brush lets you start on any scale and continue from there. It's kind of hard after the fact to change the scale of the whole map. So if I've made it this big, And it turns out I really only need that area. For the people using Tilt Brush on the PC, we do have the option under Select to select all. Now I can grab the entire landscape and everything in it and change the size, change the angle, change the location. Undo. Okay, we're back. We're back. So once you've got it going, PC users have an easy way to affect the entire sketch. Most of the other systems don't do that because of system limitations. But as more systems come out and more updates come out, you should be able to get more of a grip at a time. So if you do need to move your whole landscape around, you may have to select everything manually or look under your selection to see if you can select the whole world at once. But once we start adding these details, even just what we've done in these few minutes today, we have a lot more life, a lot more specifics going on. We have things hiding in the forest. We have context for the era and the setting. We have context for where we are in the larger world just by adding these details. If this was an underwater scene, we would need different tools for different environments, but we can still focus in the details on what we want people to experience. If we're making an ice world, what are the details for the ice world that really makes it stand out? So once you have your general landscape in place, start getting really specific. What's the weather? What's the time of day? Maybe I'll play with the lighting. So this is supposed to be a spooky vampire setting. So I'm going to turn all the lights really down into a dark blue, and we're going to have a really spooky green afterglow, and we're going to have the overall environment very, very dark. There, now this whole landscape takes on an entirely different feeling, entirely different connotation. Now maybe I'll go in and add things like little bits of fire. Let's get some orange down here. And we'll use our fire tool to add things like torches outside the tavern, or a campfire in the forest over here. So when people are looking at this environment, now we've got a couple of things that catch the eye that then draw the viewer in to check those details out. So really think all kinds of ways of your presentation and really focus in on what are those little details that make that environment pop, that really focus people in on what you want them to see. So now, because I want it to see more, I'm going to select my whole little castle over here. Except I don't need the tree. I'm going to put it over here, make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to add some more of those little torches to it. Even a little too much. Single candle in the window. So when you're looking at the environment from afar, there's that little flicker that draws the attention. Those little details. So this is making landscapes, not just getting the gist across with the basic details, and basic settings, but really focusing on individual details where you want to draw attention, where you want your visitor to spend their time. I've done a huge landscape with mountains, but most people are going to get right into the village, right into the forest and the castle, because that's where I want them to spend their time. That's where I'm putting in the details. I hope this has been inspirational. I hope this answers a lot of questions for you. I'm going to use magical green fire to write our message this week. So thank you for joining me. We do this live all the time on Twitch TV /Shameless Mayhem. subscribe. And we also keep these things recorded on youtube.com/shamelessmayhem. So ask us questions in the comments if there's things you want to learn more about, or just go ahead and enjoy and link in the pieces you do. We always like to see what inspirations we inspire in you guys. So thanks for joining us this week on Teaching Tilt Brush. Have fun, everybody.